Hi, in today's video I'm going to be covering installing the Windows subsystem for Linux on Windows 11 running in a virtual machine in Ubuntu. So this is Ubuntu 2004 and virt manager running Windows 11 with TPM and secure boot enabled. And to get this to work, there's actually one word you need to change in the virt manager setup, which I'm going to show you because it's not obvious. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick tour of Ubuntu. So this is the Windows terminal, and if you click this here after you have Ubuntu installed, you can see you can select it and it's going to load up here in the terminal. And the first thing to note is the actual file path here. You can see this is my prompt and this is showing the current file path, which is mount C users and my username. And if I list the files, you'll notice this is actually the Windows home directory. So if I change to desktop, cd desktop, and list the files, see that file is listed there. So by default, it actually opens up Linux to your Windows home directory, which is really useful because then you can do things like run scripts on Linux and save the files the Windows desktop. So what I've got here is a video review of a Newcastle game, and what I'm going to do is run a script I wrote called extract frame that uses ffmpeg to extract a frame from that video, and I'm going to save it to the Linux desktop. So extract frame, and basically this will extract a frame from this video using ffmpeg, which I've got installed on Ubuntu. So extract frame and give it the file name, the point I want to seek to, so let's just do 30 seconds. Give it an out file name, so call it outfile.png. Give it a second. Bang. You see it's extracted a frame from the video there at 30 seconds. So that's basically running a script on Linux and saving the files to the Windows side, which is really useful. So what I'm going to do now is actually open up Emacs here. So you can see Emacs installed. If you look closely, you'll see a little penguin icon down the bottom of the right of the icon there. And if I click that, sometimes it takes a second or two to actually kick in, but it will eventually load up running Emacs. And so sometimes it's a bit sluggish. I can hear my fans kicking in, so maybe it's going to do something. It does work, but obviously during the demo it's not going to. There we go. Now it's open too. So you can see sometimes it's just taking a little while to kick in, but here we can see Emacs running from Ubuntu. So this is like technically a nested VM. So this is basically we're running Windows 11 in a VM, and then Windows 11 is running Ubuntu in a VM. So this is nested virtualization. And what we can actually do is we can actually I come to mount C users. Okay, this is a test file. You can see the files there on the desktop. So this is really useful because means you can basically take your complete Linux setup for all your scripts, ZSH prompt setup, Emacs, and get that running in Windows. So that you can actually do the business on Windows without having to write batch files, that sort of thing. You can basically run all your scripts across Linux, Mac, and Windows. So it makes it really convenient. So what I'm going to do now, after that brief demo, is go through some of the setup you need to get this to work. I'm going to shut this machine down, and what I've done is created a clone of my Windows install before I installed Windows subsystem for Linux, so I can take you through the steps. So what we've got here is Windows 11 clone, and this is basically the state of the machine that I showed you in a previous video all set up. And what I'm just going to do is come across to Hikmad Ustad's channel, because I was having a chat with him about getting this working, and he's mentioning that you needed to change the CPU to model host pass-through. And I was thinking there's no model host pass-through in the options, as I'll show you in a second. That had me confused for a while, but I finally figured out what the issue was. If I come across to the CPU here, you can see by default it will be set to copy host CPU configuration. Now you can uncheck that, and then you get this list of sort of options. You'll see when you uncheck it, you get host model. Click that, you have all these options down here. What I didn't realize is you can actually edit this text, and so to get WSL working, you just need to change one thing. You just need to change model to pass through. So pass, PHROUHG, and save that. So that's the only thing you need to do to get this to work. I was trying all the different permutations of the CPU model you could select. Nothing worked, and it's not obvious at all that you can edit the text there. So that's what had me stumped. So what I'll do now is, after enabling that, I'm going to start the virtual machine and actually go through installing the Windows subsystem for Linux. Because what happens sometimes is you'll go through the install and it will hang at installing the GUI support, and you have to sort of Control-C to kill the terminal, as I'll show you in a minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the PowerShell as administrator. So have a search for PowerShell, or click it from here and run as administrator. Click yes, and you'll see up here it says administrator Windows PowerShell. So what we need to do is run wsl space -- install space -d and then capital U Ubuntu. I haven't figured out how to make this text larger in this terminal in the Windows PowerShell, but basically we run wsl space -- install space -d for distribution, and then Ubuntu with a capital U. So what's going to happen is it's going to download the virtual machine platform and the Windows subsystem for Linux. And what will happen is, at least sometimes, it may hang when it's installing the GUI support. So it'll go through this, and it may not hang for you. It may complete, but I've had this issue a couple of times, and basically what you have to do is Control-C the terminal, and then basically we reboot. Okay, so this is where it would hang for me, usually about 27%. And if it does, as I say, what we do is we Control-C, and then we basically reboot, and after we've rebooted, we run wsl -- update, and then wsl space -- shutdown. And then what you do is you run the wsl -- install -d Ubuntu again. So as I was saying, it usually hung for me about 27%. It may not now, saying all of that, but I just thought I'd mention those things if they crop up. is basically if you get an issue of it hanging at this point, you Control C, you go into the start menu and go reboot, and then you open the administrator, the PowerShell as admin again, and you run wsl --update, and then it will update and finish downloading the GUI support. And then you do shutdown, and then you run, as I say, wsl -install -d Ubuntu again, and it should then finish actually sort of loading everything up properly. And once it's done that, what will happen is you will get in the Windows start thing down here, you'll get a listing that says recently added Ubuntu. And when you click that, that will actually open a Windows terminal and prompt you to enter a username and a password for the Ubuntu account. And then after you've done that, what you need to do is actually run sudo apt update and upgrade to pull down all the latest changes. Okay, so it's installing the GUI app support. Now it's downloading Ubuntu. And so, funnily enough, this is actually going smoother than when I first did this. So it's going to take a little while to sort of download Ubuntu. But basically, once we've got that downloaded and installed, what you need to do is you need to reboot. And what typically happened when I had the processor set to host model, which is the default, is that this would all complete properly in the terminal, and you'd reboot Windows. And basically what would happen is you'd get stuck on a screen saying preparing automatic repair, and basically it'd give you some options like fix the EFI, run startup check, and none of them would actually fix it. And I tried changing to different CPUs and stuff. For example, you could change to the was it the Westlake CPU, I think it's called, or the hypervisor default, and that would allow Windows to reboot. But then what would happen is you would open the Windows terminal and try and run Ubuntu, and what would happen is you'd get an error saying virtualization is not enabled in the kernel, and basically WSL wouldn't run. And basically the whole issue of getting this to work is simply changing the one word in the CPU, as I showed you, from host model to host pass-through. And once you've done that, WSL will install properly. All the applications, the GUI applications, will actually show up on the start menu, and you'll be able to have a complete Linux setup on Windows and run all your own scripts, have all your ZSH settings, have all your command line applications, all your scripts, and as I showed you, you'll be able to run the scripts, and they will actually save to the Windows side. So, as I said, by default, what happens is when you open the Ubuntu, when you open Ubuntu in the Windows terminal, it actually sets the file path to the Windows home directory, which is really clever because you're going to want to work with files actually on the desktop here and not stored inside the virtual machine. So as you can see, this takes a little while to actually go through. It's coming up to about 50%. I think it's probably several gigs in size, this, to download this. And the other thing to mention is I'm not sure if you can actually specify a custom ISO to download. So as you can see here, we're sort of running wsl --install -d and then Ubuntu. You can also install the Linux distributions using the Windows Store, but you have to sign in to do that. So you can enable the virtual machine platform and the Windows subsystem for Linux. So you can just run wsl install, and that will set everything up, but not install a distribution. You can then go to the Windows Store and sign into the Windows Store and download a distribution using that. But that basically means you've got to have a Windows account and be signed into Windows. This way, you don't have to sign into anything. You don't have to sign into your Windows account or anything like that. But what would be interesting to note is if you can actually specify a ISO file that you've got on the desktop, for instance, to install, because what that would mean is you could create a virtual machine in Virt Manager on Ubuntu using qemu and probably actually save that and then reuse it on the Windows side. That might be possible. So you can actually take a virtual machine and then on that virtual machine under the Windows subsystem for Linux. But that's just something that occurred to me and might be worth having a look at. So as I say, what's going to happen is once this finishes, it's going to basically prompt us to reboot. And after we've done that, we can then select Ubuntu. Ubuntu will actually show up as an option in the Windows terminal drop down. And you can then basically select Ubuntu from there or from the start menu, and it will open up. And basically, say the first time you open it up, what happens is you're prompted to create a user and a user password. And then after you've done that, you need to update all the packages. Because right off the bat, if you just like, for instance, set it up and then go to app search Emacs, it's not going to return any results. So that's one thing. Another thing that threw me at first is I thought it would be a, I chose the long-term release. I chose 2004, so obviously there's been updates since that's been released. So, but still, you'd think it would work right off the bat, but you've got to update all the packages. Okay, so after all of that, which went really smoothly, the requested operation is successful. Changes will not be effective until the system is rebooted. We can close that. Come down to here, and what we do is just come across, select the little power button, and do restart. Okay, and so normally, as I said, if you have host model selected, what will happen at this stage? It would boot into the tiny, that little open source bootloader thing, and then it would keep going through that a few times, and then it would say preparing automatic repair, and it'd take you to a little Windows screen saying, do you want to repair your computer because it won't boot? And it'd give you a couple of options like turn your computer off, or automatically repair or fix the EFI, or that sort of thing. So normally, as I say, what would happen, it kind of get stuck at this stage, and then you'd get a little thing saying preparing automatic repair, but this is going to carry on booting. Okay, and we're going to get to the desktop in a second. Customizing features. Okay, we've got the desktop up again. So, if we now open the Windows terminal, we haven't got that yet, so I think. Okay, so we haven't got Ubuntu showing up as yet. Okay, there we go. So now it's cropped up with this window. It's going to say installing Ubuntu. Ubuntu's been installed. So I was getting too eager there. So at this stage, it's I remember this. Basically, it's going to go through a few things. It's going to say installing, pairing or something. Okay, so we've got to the stage where we can enter the new Unix username. So I'm going to enter my username and a password. Oh, for God's sake. Okay. Okay, there we go. So let's close this here. So what you'll notice is you get a sort of this screen come up, and this little thing down here says this message shown once a day. To disable it, please create the file hash login. So this is similar to Mac OS X. If you create a file called .hash login, which is completely empty, it will suppress the messages that come up when you're logged in. For instance, it will show all this on the Mac. It says something like last logged in from TTY and a date. So first of all, what we need to do is actually run sudo apt update and then sudo apt upgrade. So sudo apt update and our password. And after we've done update, we need to do upgrade. So this is basically going through and updating all the repositories. And then after that, we're going to do the upgrade. And from memory, there was about 279 packages, 246. So sudo apt upgrade. Yep. So once you've done this, you'll have everything up to date, all the repositories up to date. You can then go through and install applications like ffmpeg, things like ImageMagick or any command line tools. You can install applications like Emacs, as I showed you running. But it's really useful because you can basically set up all you can set up ZSH, set up your ZSH config, and your prompt, have all your scripts, have your bin directory on Linux, and you can run all your scripts on Linux, but actually work on the Windows desktop. So it's really useful because it means you can, instead of faffing about trying to get a working environment on Windows, installing things like ffmpeg or other tools like that, you can have a setup for Linux and actually use the terminal in Linux and have everything working on the desktop, interact with all the files on the desktop. So it just makes it really easy, if you're searching for stuff, on command line things, most of the stuff is going to be about Linux. So if you're a Windows user, it's going to be a bit of a pain, you find a script that does what you want, but it's, a shell script, and you need a batch file. So what this will allow you to do is basically take all these useful Linux scripts and actually run them in a virtual machine, but use that virtual machine to manipulate files that you've got on the Windows desktop, so that you can basically batch process video files, extract frames from video files. I've done a whole load of ffmpeg scripts that will basically emulate a lot of stuff that you do in a video editor, like trimming video clips, extracting One of the most recent ones I did was on scene detection, where you can basically analyze a video and see all the changes, all the shot changes. And then what you can actually do is basically chop that video up into all those scenes. So you can analyze a video, an entire video, or just a range of a video, and then basically chop all the scenes into separate clips. So this is going to take a little while to go through here. You can see it's going about 25%. And then once we got this past this stage, we can actually get on to doing things like changing our shell. So for instance, by default, this is actually going to be set to the bash shell. So what I'm going to do is actually install ZSH and ZSH syntax highlighting, and then change the shell to the ZSH shell. So that will basically allow you to take all your ZSH prompt settings from Linux and then use them in this virtual machine, as I showed you when I was demoing Windows 11 at the beginning. You can see my yes master prompt coming up, which I have set on Linux, Mac, FreeBSD. So the initial setup of this, I say, takes a little while, because as you see, when I first logged in, I was looking for stuff. Where's Ubuntu? You know, it should be installed, and you know, it took like 20-30 seconds, and then it opens this console, and you know, says, you know, preparing Ubuntu, and then after a minute, it will, you know, prompt you to create a user account and a password. Once you've done that, basically you run sudo apt update, you did, and then sudo apt upgrade, and you know, give it 10 minutes or whatever, and it's going to go through and basically update 2004 with all the latest packages. Because you need to do that, because if you just try and install something off the bat, as I said, what's going to happen is because you haven't done an update, it's not going to find it. So when I first started and I sort of installed Emacs, I tried to look for Emacs, it wasn't there, and I was a bit baffled. Okay, so you can see here 99%. And it always stops at 99% for a minute, you know. There we go. Finally finished. So let's install ZSH and ZSH syntax highlighting apt search ZSH. Okay, you can see I want ZSH syntax highlighting and ZSH. So sudo apt install ZSH syntax highlighting. Yes. And then after this is installed, we're going to change the shell. So if I run echo shell at the moment, it's been bash. So what we need to do, change that. We do that by running chsh -s, and then the path to the script, to the shell we want to change, which would be user bin zsh. So that's chsh for change shell, space -s, and then the path to the shell you want to change to. We need to enter our password. Echo shell. It would probably still be the set to the bash shell, because we haven't sort of like restarted. You know, it's like if you were just running on Linux, you know, open a new terminal. So this should probably still be set to bin bash. Yeah. So if we were to restart this, it would be set to ZSH. So let me just exit that, and now if I open the Windows terminal here, you should see we now have Ubuntu listed. Okay, so this is ZSH new users. Yeah, so we'll just do okay. So we could just do 2, you know, type one of the keys and is 2. Okay, so it's just created a ZSH file for us. So there's our sort of prompt, and we can now install something like Emacs. So if I run sudo apt install Emacs. Yeah. So this is going to install Emacs, and it takes a little while, but eventually it will show up in the start menu. And there is some sort of weird behavior with it, like it takes a while to start up, and it's not totally clear whether you need to have started up the virtual machine in the terminal before you try and launch the GUI app. And I said basically what it's doing is it's creating a virtual machine and then sort of like VNCing into that virtual machine. So what we're doing here is basically running a virtual machine and using the Spice Guest tools to sort of, you know, dial into that display like, you know, you would with VNC. And then in that virtual machine, we're running another virtual machine, which is then, you know, creating another kind of VNC connection to show the graphical app. So this is why you need the virtualization set up on your host machine, which I covered in a previous video, and how you get that set up. But the only difference from the previous video I did is changing the CPU, as I showed you, just changing the one word in the CPU from host model to host pass-through, and that's the only thing you need to change to get it to working. And that had me stumped for ages because it wasn't obvious you could actually edit the text in that drop down. So this is now finished here. So let's see if we get that come up. So we've got Emacs, and what you can do is you can right click here and you can do pin to taskbar. And then what happens is you'll get the Emacs icon here and you'll say Emacs GUI Ubuntu, and if you look closely down the bottom right, you'll see a little tux penguin. And it does take a little while sometimes to launch up, start up, because you know, we're running in a nested VM, and sometimes it's kind of not clear actually if it's doing anything. You click it and then you get a little spinning circle around the cursor for a second, but it will actually launch up eventually. And this is the there we go. Yeah, I was going to click it again, but you can see it's now opened Emacs here. See, that's running Emacs from the virtual machine in a GUI, and we can now, what we can now do is actually I come across here, I can go to mount C users, my username, desktop, oops, this is a test, and you can see that file there. What will that open in? Let's open that in Notepad. Okay, this is a test. This is a test. So you can see I'm editing a text file on the Windows desktop using Emacs installed on Ubuntu, and this is useful for me because I don't like using anything apart from Emacs these days. I just can't, anything else apart from Emacs just feels funny. So that's how the window looks, sort of moving around, and you can see here that the styling isn't really the same as the sort of default apps. It's kind of got a very dated sort of look here with these sort of icons. And we can just click that to close it. So, you know, we can install anything we want now. So, as I said, if we run pwd, you'll see we're actually on Mount C users. We're on the Linux side. But if we just type cd, that will take us to our home directory. So you can see home and then username. That's our Linux directory in the virtual machine. You can see here basically we've got our bash RC files, we've got the Emacs, we've got the ZSH configuration file. So you can now basically start setting up your Linux environment, your ZSH files, all your config files, all the terminal programs, things like Newsboat. You can install things like YTDLP. You can create a bin directory and just, you know, put all your executables in there, your binaries rather. Set up, you know, your sort of Linux environment, and then install, you know, GUI apps that, like, you know, Emacs or whatever it is. And you can then run them. So this should start a bit faster the next time. So what happens is the first time you sort of start this up, you click it and you're not sure if anything's happened, and you click it again and again, and what will happen is it'll open several copies of the application. But the first time you sort of start this up, there's a lag, but then after you've initially started it up, it's quite responsive. You know, that's moving around. It's just the styling's different. And they say you can open files on the Windows side. So that's basically setting up Ubuntu and the Windows subsystem for Linux on Windows 11, running in a virtual machine with TPM and secure boot on Ubuntu 20.04. As you can see here, we've got, you know, recently added Ubuntu. So what you can do is you can put that into the, you know, you can kind of launch it from here, but basically if you just use the Windows terminal, what will happen is every time you install a Linux distribution, it will be added to this list here. And if you select this settings thing here, what it's going to do is actually, the terminal is configured with JSON, I think, and it will prompt you to install a text editor that can edit JSON. So the settings is actually just a configuration file. So unless you've got something that can open JSON files, this is just going to throw up a menu like this. So that's another thing to note. But all the you have your PowerShell, your command line prompt, Azure, Cloud Shell, and then all your Linux distributions. And basically, you can, as I say, what happens is if I just exit this and start it up again, by default, what happens is it will open to Mount C users your username, and that is the Windows desktop. That's the Windows side of things. So documents. So if I look in downloads, see Device Guest Tools latest exe, Device Guest Tools latest, and it's just at highest .exe in the File Explorer here. Another thing to note is you'll actually see the Linux file system here. which is pretty cool. So you can come down, you can drill down here, and you can see the entire Linux file system. Yeah, so I can see the entire Linux file system of within here. So I should be able to just copy this text file into the Linux side. So I just copied a text file from the Windows desktop directly into my home directory in Ubuntu. So if I have a look here, you'll see test, let's test. This is a test. So just by dragging that file in the file explorer, in the file manager, you see got Linux, and then go Ubuntu, toggle these down, just go to home, find your user account, and you've got all the files there, which is bonkers, because you can edit, you can open and edit stuff either way, from Windows to Linux, and from Linux to Windows. I mean, the integration's brilliant. You don't get anything like this on the Mac. So this is like light years ahead of the Mac, it has to be said. Setting, virtual machines up and stuff, this is just brilliant. So you can basically, I'll go back here. You see I'm on the Windows side by default. I can, manipulate all the files on the Windows side using Linux, or just easily copy files into the Linux virtual machine and back out again. So that's absolutely brilliant. So every time you install a Linux distribution, what's going to happen is it's going to show up under here, and you can easily copy stuff out. So the reason why this is really convenient is because what it means is that you can, for example, be on the Linux side, download some Git repositories, or some configuration files, for ZSH or whatever, to your Linux desktop, and then just copy them across to the Linux virtual machine. So it just makes it really easy. You can just find someone's config or your own config or whatever, download it to your Windows desktop, and copy it into Linux, and it's working. So that's absolutely brilliant. And as I said, every time you install a GUI application on Linux, it will show up under here as sort of recently added, and you can then sort of click and add it down here. And an interesting thing to note is what happens is when you click this icon, what happens is it creates another icon here with the running application. So the icon doesn't actually, at least me setting it up, you'll open another icon, and when you close that one, it'll come back like that. So that's the sort of setup and how to, install some stuff on the Linux side, change your shell, that sort of thing. If I run echo shell now, that should be set to ZSH, echo shell, user bin ZSH, yeah. So you can see that's changed the shell to ZSH after I'd exited it and reopened it. So let me just close this down. I'll just pause this and switch back to the actual virtual machine. So the only thing we needed to do to get this working was come to the CPU under the configuration and uncheck copy host CPU configuration. And as I said, what happens is if I come back across here, Windows 11, and I'll open this one, as you can see, by default, it will be host model. Let me just close that. Come back in here. And so what you need to do is uncheck it and it is said by default it will say host model. And what you can do is just put your cursor there, and you can see it's outlined blue, and you can then just edit that text and change it to pass through. So that's PASSTHROUG, and then click apply. And then once you've done that, you're good to go. Just boot into Windows, the wsl -- install -d capital U Ubuntu. That will install everything. Do the reboot, sudo apt update, and then upgrade. Then you're good to go. You can install all your Linux stuff. So that's the only change you need to do. Uncheck that, change the model from host model to host pass-through, and apply it. And then once you've done that, as you can see here, we've got Windows 11 with TPM and secure boot enabled. We've got WSL for Linux installed. Got Ubuntu set up. And let me just show you. Let me just switch back to. Where's the other virtual machine gone? Oh, there we go. Okay. So let me just start this one up instead. So this is the virtual machine I was showing at the beginning. And I'll just show you that I've got all my shell scripts from Linux installed. Okay. Those just loading up. Okay, so if I open the Windows terminal here, come across to Ubuntu. So it takes us a few seconds for it to load up there. So you can basically see I've got all these scripts, which are sort of mainly sort of scripts using FFmpeg, or scripts for video or audio, installed in my bin directory on Linux. So for instance, I've got ffplay installed. Got ffplay. It should be ffplay. Okay, so I've got ffplay installed. So I have I'm wondering if this will work. I have a script called Scopes that shows video scopes, like you would get in a video editor, like editor like DaVinci Resolve, show the histogram and stuff like that. So let's see if I can actually get that working. See if that will actually work and show the scopes in ffplay in a window. So scopes -h, histogram, RGB, waveform. Okay. So scopes. Let's do RGB. See if this works. Okay, I was wondering if it would actually show up the ffplay as a window here. So it's not. You can see it's not opening ffplay. What I was wondering is if ffplay would open a terminal window. So it doesn't look like it's going to do anything. So that's a sort of GUI script that's sort of not working using ffplay. But home video. So I can do stuff like extract the frame as I showed you before, or let me just chop some of this video. So I'm going to do trim clip -H. So I'm going to trim this video clip. I'm just going to cut out the first 30 seconds. Trim clip, do -S the start time. So I'm going to start at the beginning of the clip, give it the in file. Not sure if I set this up to use WebM though, that's anything. Give it the in file, give it a time, 30 seconds, out.mkv. Yeah, Stod's Law did the demo with a video format I haven't set to be supported. But extracting a frame will work, as I said. I just do the extract frame, the in file, extract frame, in file, right, and then give it the time. Give it 10 seconds into the video. Tests.png. Okay. There you go. That's extracted the frame. So that was just to show you something that will work and something that don't. I said I was going to trim this particular video clip, but it was a WebM, so I need to update that particular script to work with WebM files. And you can see trying to launch FFplay didn't work. It didn't open a terminal playing the video. So that was a sort of another thing that sort of didn't work from the Linux to the Windows side, but sort of running sort of basic scripts will work. And as I said, by default, it's going to open the Windows. It's going to open Linux to the Windows file system. So as you can see, I can, run stuff like ffmpeg, ffmpeg-i, and that's going to basically give me statistics about this this file. Like the duration, the bit rate, the encoding, that sort of thing. So it's a really good way of setting up stuff for ffmpeg, other command line tools. Just basically do it all on Linux, set it all up in Linux, because it's just much easier, in my opinion, than trying to install these kind of tools on Windows. And then basically you can just run all the scripts in the Windows terminal, in Ubuntu on the Windows terminal with this nice drop down, select your Linux distribution, process all the files on the Windows desktop, and again, as I said, you can come into the Linux side as well. Let me delete this test file, and did already delete that. Let me just copy that across again. Okay, so we've got the test file there. Let me see if I can delete it from the Windows side. Okay, so you can select that. You want to delete this file? Yes. So you can see that there, I'm deleting a file in the Linux home directory using the Windows File Explorer. So basically, you can, as I said, I could copy this file across here. Now we've now got that file on the Linux side. Again, right click. You can see as you can actually open files from the Linux side with Windows stuff as well. So that's really useful. Just basically means you can it's seamless. You can just process stuff using Linux, save all the stuff to the Windows side, and then copy it back across to Linux and back and forth. So it's really, really useful. Only one thing you've got to do to get this to work is to change model host to model pass-through. And again, once you've done that, gone through all the steps I've outlined, you have a perfect working Linux environment on Windows. Be able to open. There we go. So that's Emacs again. I've installed the Dracula theme and I've copied across all my packages and stuff on my Linux side. So I've got exactly the same Emacs running on the Windows desktop as I have on Linux, which is really convenient. And again, that's just basically how you get everything set up and working. So again, let me just pause this. Come across, you'll see here the only thing you do, come to the virtual machine, CPUs, uncheck that, change the model to host-passthrough. So it's host-passthrough, PASSTHROUGH. Apply it, go through all those setups that we did, and you'll have the Windows subsystem for Linux working. You can install all the all your scripts, all the tools you would on Linux, and then use them on the Windows desktop, copy everything back and forth, and it's great. And again, let me come across here. There we go. Final shout out to Hikmad Eustad, who gave me the tips, basically saying you need to change it to the CPU to host pass-through, and I was like, saying to him, there's only host model, and it wasn't for a little while that I clicked that you can actually edit the text in that drop down menu and change it to host pass through. Once you've done that, you're good to go. So thanks to Hickman for that tip that enabled me to get it working. And as I say, there's a few good videos you might want to have a look at over here about setting up Windows on a VM and the Mac on the VM and cutting the crap from a VM. Basically did a video there explaining how you can remove stuff like secure boot and TPM using open source tools to create your own custom Windows ISO. So that's all for now, and that's basically how you can enable the Windows subsystem for Linux on Windows 11 running in a QEM virtual machine with TPM and secure boot enabled on Ubuntu 20.04 using Virt Manager. And that's all for now.